you ever wondered what therapists really talk about when they're off the clock? Are you looking to embrace open discussions about mental health while also laughing and relating to real content? Well, if so, you found the right place. Welcome to Unfiltered Therapists, a Kindred Roots Therapy Inc. podcast where the world of therapy meets candid conversations. Our podcast is tailor made for those who are ready to navigate life's challenges with humor, authenticity, and a dash of therapy wisdom. Our mission is very clear here to make therapy accessible and inviting. We want you to feel like you're part of our circle, relating to our discussions and finding nuggets of insight that resonate directly with you. Whether it's conquering anxiety, embracing self acceptance, discovering the latest therapeutic approaches, or just wanting to listen to other people bitch about their moms, we've got you covered. Join us as we kick back, shoot the shit, because believe it or not, us therapists do that too, and explore the depths of mental health, the human experience, and the overall road to wellness. We'll be here to answer your questions, discuss the topics you're most curious about, and create an atmosphere that feels like sitting on a cozy couch, chatting with your friends. If you're ready to laugh, not in agreement, and feel like you're part of a supportive community, hit the subscribe button and get ready for unfiltered conversations. This is Unfiltered Therapist, and we're about to break barriers, embrace growth, and invite you to join in this journey of true, authentic self-discovery. Let's do this. I am so excited that we have Allie. Allie is our Kindred Roots admin. Don't mind me taking a quick drink. But she's a lot more than just our admin. Allie is like the heart of our team. She recently, just last week, graduated with her Bachelor of Social Work. Woohoo! We're so excited, which means that she's officially one of our social work team members. We are very much sure that Allie will go on to get her Master's of Social Work and one day be one of our therapists, homegrown. We love that for her. And she is just one of the most authentic, lovable, sweet people ever, and has been brave enough to open up our podcast, episode 1, by sharing her personal story of coming out. This was totally unplanned, but happened to fall perfectly in line with the Calgary Pride Week. So we love that for us. We love that for Allie. And hopefully in this conversation, we can just get really into the nitty gritties of what that experience was like for Allie, hopefully get some people feeling comfortable that their stories are equally normal and acceptable, and that there's other people who know what it's like to go through these experiences and maybe learn a little something along the way. So, hi, Allie.
Hi, that was such a lovely introduction. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sweet. Okay, you ready?
I am.
Okay, let's get into it. So I feel like the best way to start is just have you start sharing your personal coming out story and what led to that decision in the first place.
Absolutely. I think for me, I came out at 24 years old, which is a little bit later in life, I want to say. My coming out was a little bit of a curveball. I think for anyone that knew me, I was in a relationship with a man. We had a wedding planned. And then I realized my sexuality and ultimately had to make that choice and authentically live my life. And that was the best decision to do. And I'm very, very proud of myself for being brave enough to come to that conclusion and get to know myself. And here we are, years later.
I feel like the situation of not just coming out at 24, but have, a very heterosexual lifestyle, relationship, impending wedding, is something that a lot of people are probably going to be like, oh my gosh, how did it get that far? What do you think was the road to self-discovery for you in terms of coming to terms with your sexuality in the first place?
That's a great question. And I think also to the point of how did it get that far is such a good point. I think for a lot of queer people, especially lesbian women, I think there's a term that's called compulsory heterosexuality. And I think when I look at my life, that played a significant role into that. So that's a topic. It came from an essay written in the 1980s talking about compulsory heterosexuality and the lesbian experience or existence, I think it was called. And so basically, it argued that society pressures women into heterosexuality due to patriarchal structures. And the effects of that can be just a denial of queerness. So, kind of denying or suppressing any feelings, adhering to strictly heterosexual norms, just because, in society, we've been conditioned to the default is everyone is straight until they come out. And so I think with that, there's a lot of delayed recognition. So I think a lot of queer individuals like myself might take a little bit longer to realize or accept their identities just due to that societal pressure and the need to conform. And so I think with that, I, throughout my life had entered heterosexual relationships without having the genuine, maybe attraction or genuine love, just because that's what was expected. And I didn't know any differently. And so for me, I didn't know what I didn't know. And
Mm.
then when I realized it, that's when I came to that conclusion. And I was like, this isn't it for me. And I knew what my identity was. But that was a hard process. It took me months and months to come to that.
I actually like really appreciate that you just talked about not knowing what you don't know. And the compulsory side of things I think is so interesting because you're right. Like I almost hear it from like a court perspective of like innocent until proven guilty. And I hate that that's the correlation that my brain is going to, but it's like,
Sure.
you're straight. We all assume that you're straight. That's how society like expects us to be. That's the type of relationships we enter. And so I wonder, in some ways we talk about people who just know or people who might need to have some level of exposure or experience in order to recognize like, ooh, that felt different. That was different than I've ever experienced before. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Do you remember like prior to being 24 years old, even really young, having experiences that you look back on now and you're like, oh yeah, I guess that could have been an interesting sign?
Oh God, yeah. Like there's so many instances from when I was younger, from when I was a kid, where I look back and I think, that was a sign there. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I'm like, how did I not know? How did I go that long? But I remember being a kid and I like 8 years old, and I remember getting into a fight with my friend and being so sad
Mm.
about it. And I remember saying to someone, like another girl in my class, I remember saying to her, "You don't understand. I love her. Like, it's not just my friend." And I was like, "Oh, that was like a little tiny crush." And it's funny, I always had like a little boy crush all the time. I was always had a crush on a boy. And then when I got older, I was always like texting a guy, but I was never sad if they didn't like me back, which I think was a sign that my feelings weren't genuine. And then I look back, I'm like, no, like all of my other friends would have been devastated as a teenager, a teenage girl, if a boy doesn't like you back or they break up with you. And
Right.
I was like, I'm good. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I think the signs were there for sure.
Yeah. When you officially came out, how did your friends and your family react?
They were, it was a mixed review. Um, Luckily, my family was super, super supportive. They didn't just tolerate my queerness, they actively celebrated it, which
Mm.
was probably the biggest blessing that I could have received there. A lot of my friends were absolutely okay with it. I think maybe they had some questions just given the circumstances of everything. However, I think they approached it with just complete empathy and understanding. They didn't judge me for keeping it a secret. They didn't make me feel shamed. So, all of the people that are in my life now, I'm really thankful for that. And I think, were there issues with other people? Absolutely. But I think that's just life, unfortunately.
Yeah, I actually think that's such a great point is that it doesn't really matter the topic. People's responses are not always,
Mhm.
overwhelmingly positive or overwhelmingly negative. People can very much surprise us in how they handle information. Would you say like it was pretty equal 50-50 between like a positive reaction and a challenging reaction or different than that?
Yeah, I would say maybe a little bit more on the positive side for sure.
Oh, that's
Which
so
I'm
good.
lucky for. Yeah, like especially like everyone in my family was just so supportive, and given the curveball that they kind of got dealt with. And I think they went above and beyond in making me feel not only accepted, but celebrated and worthy and deserving of love and all of these things. I never want to be treated differently because of my queerness. However, I do think, given the nuances of oppression that happens with being queer, my family really, really created protective barriers for me with that and made me
Mm.
feel more confident in myself and my identity, which I'm so thankful for.
Love that. I'm hoping that we can maybe actually pause and talk a little bit about LGBTQ vocabulary, because I think that there's a lot of people out there that struggle with what words to use and what words mean, and these titles being something that can mean something so different to everyone. So I know that for you, you identify as queer and you identify as lesbian. Can you, in your own capacity, your understanding, explain what that means to you?
For me, it was really, really hard to identify as a lesbian when I came out because there was so much in my internal homophobia, negative stigma that came with that word. I think that comes from just like growing up as a millennial child in the early 2000s. You see things and you watch media where there's so many, the joke is, you know, the gay person on the show, or the joke is the lesbian on the show. And so for me, for a long time after I even came out, I would say lesbian and I like internally would recoil at that. So for me, I really wanted to change that, change my mindset, reframe my perspective, and be empowered by that identity, because I am proud to be a lesbian. And I think there's so much also learning and accountability for other people, because I think because of the way there are so many stereotypes, a lot of people, when they think of a lesbian, might not think, you know, it's someone that could be feminine or it could be this person or whatever. So I think it was a little bit about empowerment and taking that power back, releasing a lot of my shame and internal homophobia with that. And I think, and that's a kind of similar with queer, because I know that that used to be kind of like a negative term. And so I think for me, like, I love saying queer. I love saying I'm a part of the queer community. It's just kind of an overarching umbrella term. Um, but I think it's really important to just refer to an individual with whatever identity that they say for themselves. So, and that was something that somebody asked me when I first came out. They asked me what my preference was to call myself, and I hadn't thought about that until that moment. And I really appreciated that moment, because there are so many nuances when it comes to coming out and
Oh my
your whole
gosh.
identity changes. So, just being asked what my preference was with what I want to refer to myself as was a really, really nice thing to do.
That is, it's funny because I've always wondered, like, I think traditionally we understood that saying that you're gay means that it's like a man who loves men. And if you're a lesbian, it means that you're a woman who loves women. In your experience, especially now, like, would you say that the terms gay and lesbian can be interchangeable, or what does that look like?
I think, well, when I first came out publicly, I said I'm gay. And for me, I did that because I wanted, it was just an easier way to say it, I think, because I feel like back then I was more comfortable with identifying as gay. It was, again, didn't have that like formal lesbian term onto it. That was me having to release a lot of that shame and internal homophobia. But I think there are differences to it. I think it's important to recognize, like, if someone is gay, that's a man who wants to be with a man. And for me, the term lesbian has been equally empowering in regards to the way me and my partner maybe have experienced some negative things in regards to just like being out and men approaching us. You know, you understand what that's like as a woman living in this world that's very patriarchal. And so I think for me, it's really important to identify as a lesbian because I'm not interested in men, and that's okay. It's also almost a bit of a protective factor there.
Totally. I have a question actually about that exact experience you were just describing of being out with your partner and being approached by
Mhm.
men. I wonder if this is just a general stereotype that I have, slash, I believe I have an awareness of, but maybe it's very wrong. So please correct me. Is
Mhm.
it true in your experience that if you are approached, let's say by a man and you are with your partner or you express that you're lesbian, that it can be like a hypersexualized term or
Yes.
something that's like suddenly a turn on to a man that you are a lesbian or in a lesbian relationship?
Absolutely. And that's what I'm referring to. So
Mm.
there have been so many times, and I'm not saying that because I'm not trying to be like, man, Madison, you're super hot. Like that's not where
Yes.
I'm coming from. But I
Well,
think
you are.
generally, there's been countless times where her and I have just been together as a couple. We're not doing anything crazy. We're literally just together. And we have been, you know, approached by men in a sexual manner. And I remember specifically one instance, this man who we didn't know, like they were just sitting at a booth beside us. And I was with my friends, and this person was with his friends. And we started talking kind of over the ledge. And I remember he said something to me about Madison that just was like really gross, really sexual.
Hmm.
And I was mad because don't do that. Don't be that guy in a bar that's creepy to a
Yes.
woman that's clearly at least probably 15 years younger than you. Don't
Oh,
be that guy. Secondly, you would not do that if I was a guy. No man would go up to another guy and his girlfriend and say what he said.
yes.
No guy would do that. Come on. Have you ever been like explicitly very sexually hit on when you were with your husband
Oh my
out
gosh,
anywhere?
no.
No,
Not that way.
because men respect men, they don't respect
Mhm.
women. So
Mm.
I think you lose that protective factor when you're in a lesbian relationship that is a little bit different. And I
Mm.
think a lot of women who might listen to this can relate to that. You know what it's like to be catcalled when you walk down the street. Now
Totally.
imagine you're alone and you're walking with your girlfriend, your fiance, or your wife, and you're holding hands, and now you're worried from, again, that sexual harassment or worse consequence, right?
Totally.
There was a time just recently, her and I were walking downtown and we were trying to find an Uber, and the rates were really high. So we just kind of kept walking, waiting for them to die down. And so we were just off the street and we were looking at my phone, and I think she had her arm around me, totally normal instance. And there was a group of guys coming down the street, just like yelling horrible, again, sexual comments at us. And it's like, for what? And
For
in
what?
that moment, it's like, we have nowhere to go. I don't know what's going to happen next. And it's just things like that that I never realized when I was in a relationship with men. Like that never happened to me when I was with a
Mm.
guy. So you
Yeah.
lose that. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I hear that in a way of like almost like an illegitimized sexuality where people don't take it seriously, like that's your preference and that's the end all be all. It's like, I can convince you otherwise, or like it's just a phase. And I think that when we see men come out, people don't say like, it's just a phase. But when women come out, we hear a lot of like, it's just a phase, or like maybe you're just experimenting, or like that sort of
Hmm.
thing. Um,
Hmm.
do you think that because you went from being in like a heterosexual committed relationship to then coming out as gay, did anyone ever question if this was just like an experimental phase or like some sort of like, I was going to call it like a quarter life crisis or something along those lines?
No, that's fair. Not that I can think of. I think, and that was probably because when I did come out, it was more serious. Like I was ending a 9-year relationship. I had to call off a wedding. I had to, I had bought a home with this person. Lawyers were involved. It was a whole process. So I think because of just like the extent of the seriousness of the relationship that I was ending, it wasn't questioned. But I think that's a really common perception. And I think that happens a lot too for maybe women that come out that don't have that. And maybe it is viewed as like, that is such a classic, like that's a cliche. It's just they're experimenting right now. And I think that's because too, like women operate differently with each other than men do. I think, how many times have you just like eh, cuddled just with a friend just out of pure friendship? You know what I mean? So I
Yeah,
think,
totally.
yeah, and so I think girls can they don't have the, you know, stigma of like doing things like that platonically, that
Mm.
and versus men, I feel like if they do that, it's you're gay or, worse, right? So I think
Totally.
maybe that is also what plays into just experimenting. Like, how many girls did you go to school with would make out with other girls at like a party or something? You know what
Oh
I
my gosh,
mean?
yeah, I felt like it was just like a thing. Like people just especially, and I always wonder like generationally how much of like a difference there is, like because we grew up very similar in age and like that mid millennial vibe, you know what I mean? And you know, for instance, yesterday I was watching the new movie on Netflix, the Adam Sandler movie. I think it's called You're Not Invited to My Bar Mitzvah. I can't
Oh,
remember
I'll have to
exactly.
watch. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and it's like the girl in the movie is the main character is turning 14. So the girls that are being highlighted are like 13, 14 years old. And there's this scene in the movie where they go to a hangout at this one girl's house and one of the girls asks, "Who do you have a crush on or who are you into?" And the girl answers saying, "No one, because there's not a lot of boys to choose from in our school." And the main like the other girl says, "Oh, so you're only into guys?" And I, for a second, paused and I thought, like, we never would have seen that in a movie like, you know, 10, 15 years ago. That never would have been a thing. And even after she was like, I think so. And the girl's like, that's cool. Some of us are straight. Like, it was like the flip of the narrative of being like, oh, it's weird if you're only straight, but like, good for you. And it wasn't even like we were watching a movie of like, girls in, let's say, like high school or like university. This was like a junior high school aged scene and not at all put in this way of it being like weird or inappropriate. And I just thought to myself, like, we have come so far in these conversations about normalizing not being heterosexual, especially in media. Do you see a difference? Do you find that you feel like there's been changes or progressions at all in that sense?
So much. And I think it's especially interesting, yeah, like with what you said with our generation, because growing up, like I was born in 95. So when I was 10, it was 2005, which is when marriage became legalized in Canada, which is so crazy.
Oh my
Or
gosh,
gay marriage.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And I think the media that we watched was rough compared to what's up now. It was so like, one of those things where you're like, you can't say that now. That's not going to do well. Very, very true. And I think that plays a huge part of it. And it's really interesting that you saw that. I do think this generation growing up now is so much more going to be progressive than even we were. And maybe that's just how it is universally, right? But
Yeah.
it's very, very interesting. I think about, we've talked about this before, but the movie Mean Girls,
Yes.
that came out when I was like, I don't know, 8. And the whole Janice Ian is a lesbian. I can't invite her to my birthday party. There's me girls in their bathing suits. That whole rhetoric, catastrophic as a young little queer person
Oh my
watching that.
gosh.
And we wonder why it didn't come out till I was 24, right?
When
There are
you
things
told me
like
this,
that.
like this story, this realization, I actually like, I felt like it, like the biggest light bulb aha moment ever went off in my head with this like analogy or that storyline because Mean Girls is literally like the, I feel, cultural moment of our
Mhm.
entire generation. Like people still quote Mean Girls probably at least once a week. I feel like that's a low ball too. And like from the perspective of being gay, there was gay men being seen as the gay best friend or the super relatable one, or there's like that like weird friendliness. Whereas like the only example of a lesbian storyline was totally villainized. And I didn't see it until you explained that to me. And I actually don't think I've stopped thinking about that since we had that initial conversation. I'm like beside myself at that idea.
In this dissertation, I will. Or write an essay about that. But it's true. And I think there are definitely a lot of intersectional factors that come with the queer community. And I think that I don't know, in my eyes, I think it's fair to say that society had representation of gay men, maybe not in the best way, but they had more representation of gay men than they did with women.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
100%.
interesting, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
What would you say in your own experience was the biggest challenges that you faced in your coming out journey and how did you overcome them?
I would say being comfortable in my identity and really owning that and walking that fine balance of being passionate about being an advocate for my own community while also not suffering in a turmoil cycle that will lead to burnout. I think it's hard to be an advocate for a community that you also identify with because you're nuanced with oppression, and that can be really exhausting. I think that's more so where I'm at now of like, when is it my turn to speak up? Do I have to be the one to always speak up? That I think is more of my challenges now, I would say.
I think that this is such an important idea. It really is. I think, at one point, especially when you were wrapping up your degree and I asked you, when you go in to do your master's, because you will, and you become a therapist, do you foresee that you'll want to work with this community, the queer community? Do you think that that will be your focus? And I think in that conversation, we talked about how hard it can be to live in a community, advocate for that community, work in that community, because you just don't get any space to breathe in it. And
Mhm.
I think that we can be so deeply connected and passionate about something and always be an advocate for it, but it also doesn't have to be the soapbox that we spend our entire day on either.
Mhm.
Um, and I wonder for you with coming out at 24, if that exhaustion also came from a place of having to like educate the people closest to you about like how to talk with you or handle your coming out or future relationships or those types of things, where you were in a position of advocating for the greater community, but also setting the foundation for your own life and trying
Mhm.
to come to terms with that at the same time. Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. I think it's a delicate balance of wanting to promote education and awareness on issues that might be stigmatized or just factually incorrect, while also taking the self care and the precautions to know that it's not easy to talk about how a large part of the world doesn't want you to have equal rights.
Yeah.
And I say that as someone like talking about oppression with myself, like I'm a white cisgendered woman. I've never lived in poverty. I come from a privileged background. And so for me to talk about that, again, intersectionality comes into play. I'm living a life where maybe my queer friends who are black might not live
Totally.
the same way. So I think there's an important duality to that. But at the end of the day, I read this and I found it really profound. And it said, it is not the oppressed job to teach the oppressor about the oppression. And I think we
Huh.
all in this day and age have the internet. We can all Google issues. I think right now there is such a huge target on the trans community.
Yeah.
And I'm not trans, but again, that's a community that's umbrellaed with the queer community. And I will always, always, always advocate and educate and spread awareness on trans issues, on trans rights, because they are human rights.
Yes.
And it is such a blazing fire right now, especially in the States, but here too, we're not as progressive as we'd like to think we are.
No.
And it's hard. I usually post like a pride post every single year, and I didn't this year because I felt exhausted by it. Every
Yeah.
time I would go to write something, I just was like, I don't even know what to say because I was exhausted by having to explain it. And, after the election had just happened, it just felt so gaslighty. And
Yes.
at the end of the day, when people say, like, there shouldn't be, queer issues or trans issues in politics. And like, yeah, you're right. It's a human issue. It's not a political issue. I agree
Yeah.
with you. But we have to vote for people that want people to be okay.
Right. Right.
That's at least where I stand.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no, and
there.
no, but I think it comes down to the fact that we're talking about human rights in general. And even
Mhm.
going back to one of the first things you said, which was when you first came out and someone asked you, how do you identify? What do you want to be known as or called or whatever? And we have such a stick up our asses about what is considered fair or normal or unreasonable. And like, I have this deep rule in my own life and professional life too. And I say
Mhm.
this to my team, I say this to my clients, I say it to everyone. I don't actually really give a fuck what you believe in. Genuinely, I think everyone has the right to believe in whatever they want to believe. However, I absolutely do not stand for people's beliefs intentionally trying to hurt other people. And if we are going to ask that other people respect our opinions, then we must also respect the opinions of others. And if people want to live their lives in ways that you don't understand, you better have a certain level of tolerance to that if you want those
Mhm.
people to also acknowledge and let you live the life that you choose to live. And I think that sometimes that perspective can be seen as allowing an ongoing narrative of them versus us, or a lack of progression. And I actually think that at this point in time, we know that there's so much divisive narrative going on in the
Mhm.
world, particularly North America, because of what we see. But because of that, if we can't all agree, why can't we just learn to be tolerant, understanding, and respectful? Like, we've just lost the ability to be respectful at the bare
Mhm.
minimum. And so much of these conversations, I think, has made it hard for people to live in their own identity, not just from a place of a lack of safety, but in exhaustion. And I actually applaud
Mhm.
you for being honest about how you want to post about pride, but haven't, because it's just exhausting to not know how to say it, what to say, what is authentic, what feels like you're like dancing around the issue. Like,
Mhm.
it's hard to know. And it's really easy to just want to shut down and avoid the whole conversation
Mhm.
altogether.
Mhm. And then I go online and I see people commenting on things on social media, and it's hurtful.
Yeah.
You know, with the queer community, we're not groomers. We're not, trying to recruit anybody. People are going to figure out their sexuality on their own. That's not my role.
Yes.
Um, and it's also difficult to feel like, again, why is this always on me to say something?
Yeah.
That's hard because
Yeah.
I'm already struggling with feeling safe and feeling like I can just be in my relationship as we are.
Yes.
And now I have to educate people too on why they're oppressive. Come on.
Yeah.
That's
No.
hard. That's hard to do.
Yeah. What do
Mhm.
you think, like, if you could give any advice to the general public or anyone who's listening, what do you believe makes a good ally? Or how would that pressure be relieved off of feeling like, going back to the quote that you shared, which is, the oppressed shouldn't carry the burden of educating the oppressor on why something is oppressive? Like, how do others support this so that it doesn't feel like there's so much weight on your own back?
I think anytime there's been a situation that has been compromising my safety, my ally friends really take on that role of alleviating that, which is great. I think they also, everyone that I'm surrounded with, they do a really good job of educating on issues like that. So I think if you want to be a supportive ally to someone in your life that is queer or however they want to identify, I think things like being beyond just accepting and tolerant and actually
Yeah.
celebrating that person's identity. And I can give some examples of that. So when I came out, my family did a great job of actually in making sure I felt celebrated by little things like my dad will text me every June for Pride Month and just say, I'm so proud of you. I love how happy you are. I love your
Aw.
relationship. Things like that. My mom will buy all of these little rainbow trinkets to put on the Christmas tree or anything like that. She went to the Pride Parade last year because it was the first time Calgary had one after COVID, and I wasn't even in town. She just went. Like, which is sad.
Mom!
I know. And so she does such a good job of like educating herself on stuff too. And my
Yeah.
dad called me a couple weeks ago because he had like a shitty experience on the golf course. Someone he was golfing with like made a shitty comment about Bud Light. And he calls me, he's like, first of all, he was like, can I talk to you about something? And I want to check in because I know this is a hard topic for you. So even that. And then going on being like, and then I was so mad and I said this. And I was like, yes, Jeff, go for it. And also things like, um, for example, this past weekend, it was the Great Outdoor Comedy Club in Calgary
Oh my
at
gosh,
Princess
yes.
Island Park. JVN, Jonathan Van Ness, was there from Queer Eye. We love them. They're great. And Madison's mom invited us to that event. and it was like a queer event. And so little things like that, just to just celebrate and show acceptance, I think are really, really important in being an
Yes.
ally and being supportive and showing that person, hey, I love you. Let's celebrate you. And I
Oh,
think it's important to check in on also too, how was coming out for you? Was that difficult? Why was that
mm,
difficult? How can I learn? I think it's absolutely okay to ask someone about their personal experience and wanting to support them and maybe do differently for next time,
yeah.
is really good too.
Yeah. No, I think that that's really good advice is just asking. I think that oftentimes we're so scared to say or do the wrong thing that we just avoid it. And it's better to just ask than it is to just assume and then
Mhm.
try and backtrack. Like we can learn, we can all agree to learn. I feel like for listeners on this, we need to learn a little bit about Madison. So tell us about what is your current love life? What's going on? What's the details?
I am engaged to my beautiful fiance. Her name is Madison. She actually was my best friend for 15 years before we delved into a relationship. So we know each other well. We've been together officially for 3 years. I proposed to her almost a year ago. It was November last year. And we are so happy. She's the best. She's my better half in all ways. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Do you feel like your relationship together is different in the sense that you guys were best friends, both with an understanding that you were straight prior to ending up in a relationship and both coming out as gay?
I think that friendship built a really great foundation for the relationship we have now,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it's kindness and respect at a minimum is what we how we operate. I think it was a really easy transition from a friendship to a romantic partnership, which we just I don't know, maybe that's how it was always meant to be. The universe is always up to things, so perhaps that was always going to be the way. I
Yeah.
can't imagine ever doing that with anybody else, to be honest with you, because it is just so different. And but it was also such a beautiful thing to learn about her so much more intimately and vulnerably than I had previously. Because
Right.
as I mentioned, she was my best friend for so long. It's like, I know everything about you, but not even close. And so being able to learn about her and everything is just, it was great. It was
Totally.
like I was still discovering a whole new person as well.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. I know you've told me this story, but I just think it's like such an interesting just dichotomy for people to hear too. So this being that you were in a relationship with a man and you were proposed to, and then you were in a relationship with a woman and then you were the one who proposed. And I think any of us want to know, like, what was it like to be on the other side of things? What was that experience like?
Oh, I was so nervous. I was so nervous, and it was so hard to keep it a secret. I don't think I did a good job of that, to be
Really?
honest. Yeah, I wanted there were some because I had it planned for probably at least it was like 5 or 6 months before I proposed. I had the whole
Oh
thing
my
planned.
gosh.
I had her ring a good month and a half before I proposed, and it was just here. And there were so many nights where I'd be lying in bed at night and I was thinking, should I just do it now? Thank
Oh,
God. Like I had a whole plan. There was a photographer. We traveled to Portland. It was a whole thing. So I'm happy that I didn't give in to my own just like anxiety and nervousness. But it was difficult because she's also the person that I share everything with. And I was like, this is about us. How can I not share that with you? And don't get me wrong, we were on the same page about getting engaged. I would never just propose without having that conversation. It was something that we both wanted. And I think she probably knew it was coming. She just didn't know how. So, but it was hard. Yeah, it was very, very difficult.
I feel like it's one of those things that I always think as a woman, I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful that I never have to have that experience. But then sometimes I wonder, like, what would it have been like? And you do see now that's definitely, again, a stereotype that's being broken where we do see, even in
Mhm.
heterosexual relationships, women being the ones that propose. I remember asking my husband before we got engaged, I was like, man, you're taking way too fucking long. Like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do it. And he was like, I'll say no to you. I was so mad because I was like, come on, like For me, and this is
No.
maybe like a problem for me because I was out of control. It was the one thing, a big decision in my life that I couldn't initiate because my partner was like, no, we're doing this the old fashioned way. And it drove me crazy. And I used to think to
Mhm.
myself, like, if I was going to be this person, if I was going to do it, what would I plan? And every time I would think of anything, I would instantly be like, oh, I could never make this decision. It's too hard. It's too hard to make a decision. So
Mhm.
kudos to you. And it sounds like, I mean, like you said, you guys went to Portland, you had a photographer, like you put some
Yeah.
effort into this thing.
Oh yeah.
You had it
Go
all set
go
out.
big or go home.
I love
I'm a romantic. I like to
yeah.
be beautiful in these ways. But it was
Wedding
good. And
planning.
I wedding planning. I think we're gonna start wedding planning in the spring. She wants to propose to me. Not that that's a requirement on my end, but that's something that she's wanting to do as well. I think she's a bit mad that I beat her to the punch a little
Aw.
bit. We're competitive that way. But we'll be wedding planning in the spring. I think we'll have our wedding in like the summer of 2025. So we got some time.
Oh, you're good. You got
Yeah,
time.
we got
Yeah.
time. And it's funny because there are things that you don't think about when you're in a heterosexual relationship, like who proposes to who, who's walking down the aisle first, whose last name are you taking, all of these different things. And when you get into a queer relationship, you're like, none of that matters. Like it means nothing. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Maybe I think at the root of it is when you get rid of some of those societal expectations of what a marriage is and you actually just get to what a marriage is. It's like the sanctity of that relationship and that commitment is actually at the forefront of why you're doing what you're doing. And
Mhm.
do you feel like you have more clarity about why marriage means something to you now versus when you were engaged before?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I also think being in a relationship that is authentic to my identity, there is a lot more genuine feelings there. And I don't say
Yeah.
that because in any previous relationship that I might have had, it's not that it was fake. At the time it was very real, but who I am now in a relationship is just so genuine and authentic, and I just want to be with this person because I love them so much. I could care less if we got married in a cardboard box or if we eloped or if we did anything like that. Obviously, yes, I think we both have a vision, but the actual like marriage component of it, that is just because we want to be with each other. We want to build a family.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I okay, I have two questions, but let's go backwards first for
Okay.
this one. I feel like again this is just like a general question of you going back to being in relationships with men in the past and it not being fake but it being different and then being 24 realizing no I'm definitely gay and then being in a relationship with a woman and in that process how did you know that you were for sure lesbian or gay and not bisexual?
I think when I first started realizing that I had queer feelings, I thought I was bisexual. Not to say that that's the only way to come out. I think, bisexuality is a very real and valid identity. It needs to be represented more, celebrated more, even within the queer community, in my opinion. I think there's a lot of biphobia in the queer community that comes with that I think is really shitty. So I just want
Yeah.
to honor to all my bisexual people. I love you. I see ya. For me, I think the reason I originally thought I was bisexual is because, yeah, I had been with men. I was always so boy crazy. Like, but it's as if I was overcompensating for something,
Mm.
which I recognize now. And when I had my first experience with a girl, I immediately thought to myself, "Oh, that's what it's supposed to feel like." It was as if I was in the dark and a light had just been turned on.
Oh,
It was, I know I sound so cheesy when I say
I
that,
love
but
it.
it's
So
true.
cute. The
It's true.
feels.
And I just had no idea. I had no idea. And that goes again with compulsory heterosexuality. You just grow up in a world that's patriarchal. You just grow up in a world that kind of caters to men. And I think as women, you do that. And so when I had an experience that wasn't with a man, I was like, oh, like it was like, I was like, I have butterflies just from like this, you know what I mean? I was
Yes.
like, oh, I was like, I was like, in the Grinch when his heart like goes bigger, he's like, that was me.
Oh my God. That's so cute.
You know what I mean? I know I'm so
I
cheesy, but
love it.
that's
I
true.
love it. Honestly, though, okay, this is going to sound so screwed up, but like, man, welcome to my brain. As you're describing this, I had this image in my head. You're going to be like, Ali girl, what the fuck? Of eating chicken nuggets, and you think chicken nuggets are like pretty good, like they're fine, but then you discover like sweet and sour sauce for the first time, and then you like eat a chicken nugget with sweet and sour sauce, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, that's the best thing I've ever had in my life. That's how this is supposed to be. Don't ask me why I just equated experiencing your true sexuality for the first time to eating a chicken nugget. Maybe because I need
Valid.
to go eat something, but like, listen, that's what is going through my head right now. Just so you know.
Literally. And you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know.
And
Exactly.
once you determine, oh, I really like this, then you know.
Yeah, you're never going to eat chicken nuggets without dip ever again.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, this makes sense to me. This totally makes sense to me. What
Mhm.
advice would you give to someone who is contemplating coming out or is in the early stages of coming out, that you wish you had known when you were in that period?
Hmm. I think the advice I would give is that at the end of the day, it is your life and you're the one living it.
Mhm.
And inevitably, you likely will have some, I hope not, but you likely will have some negative reactions. You could lose people, but those aren't going to be the people you want in your life anyway. And that's a blessing in
Mm.
disguise. It's going to hurt like a bitch when it does. But man, you don't want those people in your life. So it's okay. And it takes time. And I think you can be equally as proud of yourself when you finally come out and equally scared at the same time. And that's
Mm.
okay too. We all, I'm telling this to a therapist, I'm like, we all know multiple feelings can exist at the same time.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Crazy. I
See,
think, yeah, crazy.
got
Sorry,
it.
go ahead.
Wow, nailing it. I was gonna say, like, listening to you doing that acceptance and commitment therapy. Just
Yeah,
it's all feelings are good feelings. They're just feelings.
exactly. They're just feelings.
Just feelings.
And I think it's important to just try and surround yourself with the people that are going to support you because otherwise you're just going to live in turmoil if you're surrounded by people that don't support that. And that's really, really hard, even if it's people that you've known your whole life. If they don't support you, you're not going to do well. And so I
Yeah.
think it's really, really important to try and find a supportive network. That's why there's so many organizations in Calgary that are supportive of that. So reach out to those organizations, contact Kindred Roots for therapy.
Thank you
Is
for the
what I
plug.
would say.
Kindred Roots.
I but actually, though, I think it's really, really important to set yourself up with support, to be proactive with self care in those aspects because it's so easy to suffer with that. I
Yeah.
also think something for me personally, I thought, because I came out quite publicly, I just sent it on Instagram one day, and which was a plot twist. And I think at that time, I was under the impression that it was a one and done. I would never have to come out again. No, you come out to every single person you meet because the world is heterosexual by default. So you get more comfortable with it over time. I remember the first time I came out afterwards to like someone, it was my mentor at the time at work. She was my boss, but more than that, she's like my mentor, friend, everything.
Yeah.
And I knew she was supportive just because I know her as a person. I knew she would be an ally. But oh my gosh, was it hard to get the words out. I remember saying and stuttering it and just being like, you should know that I'm gay. And it was like so painful probably to listen to. I think she thought there was maybe some kind of neurological event happening in my brain. He was probably worried maybe I was going to suffer from a stroke because I literally could not get it. But it's true. And that was after I had come out to like all of my family and most of my friends. So um it's that was hard, but it does get easier over time. Even if it's just to like the barista at Starbucks, you can just say, "Hey, I'm gay." I don't know.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, so just
Okay.
it takes time.
Yes. Two things just came to mind. One,
Mhm.
I'm going to tell a quick story about this too, and then I actually have a question about it.
Okay.
So, back in June, there was an event here in Okotoks, which is where our office is, and Kindred Roots had sponsored. It was like a youth expo for youth who were celebrating Pride, and there was an attendant that came, and it was the first time they'd ever told anyone that they were gay. And no one was there with them. They came from out of town just to come to this event to test what it would feel like to say out loud that they were gay. And I like literally have goosebumps thinking about it, because I just thought, like, what an incredibly brave and vulnerable experience to go and be in a space that one might perceive to be safe because there's no repercussions in your personal life if it doesn't go well. But this actually leads to my question for you, which is, in some ways, I think that we assume that coming out to family and friends would be more difficult than coming out to a stranger. But I can also see that there would be very big differences in those relationships, in the sense that your friends and family know who you are and maybe have a deeper appreciation for you to be happy and want to support you versus strangers. Is that a true judgment? Or how would you say coming out to people who you believe should support you unconditionally versus a stranger who doesn't owe you anything? What does that feel like? What's the difference?
I think it's actually easier to come out to a stranger. I think it's harder to come out to the people that are closest to you.
Mm,
For example, for me, like my mom was the first person that I had told when I came out, but that was the one that made me the most nervous because
yeah.
me and my mom are really close, and I knew she was going to be supportive. Like I know my mom, but I didn't know how it was going to change the way she viewed me. And I
Mm,
think that's the biggest piece. Like I think from a safety standpoint, telling a stranger you might not know if they're homophobic, and that might be scary. But at the end of the day, they're a stranger. You can walk away from that. I think
yeah,
when it's
so
people
true.
that you're close with, that boundary is hard. And so and it's interesting because I think a lot of queer people that I know will often tell like their friends first versus their family, and it's because it's harder to tell the people that you're closest with because you don't know how that's going to change your relationship, especially for someone who's like a people pleaser like me. I'm like, I would rather be any box that appeases you than just being myself. And that's another issue, but more on that
Working on
later.
it, we
Working
hope.
on it, working
Yes, we
on
love
it.
this.
And so I think it is harder for that. And I think in regards to if someone in your life, to anyone that's listening, comes out and maybe you're not the first person they tell, to not take that personally because it has nothing to do with if you're a safe person to tell or if they didn't want you to know. It has probably more something to do with this is the person that I just really want to accept me and I'm still figuring it out and I'm scared and I don't want my relationship to change, and ultimately it's going to, because
Yeah.
it's an identity thing.
Yes. Yes. Such good advice. I wonder if you feel comfortable sharing at all, like, for you, the connection between the coming out journey, the experiencing of coming to terms with your sexuality and your overall mental health, like how deeply those things were intertwined with each other.
Deep. It goes deep. I had, I think when I came out, I was at the lowest point in my life. And I look back just that time and oh man, like I just look sick, truly. And that's really sad. I think anyone that knows me and sees me now can see like how happy and like genuinely like confident I am with my identity. But
Yeah.
at the time I felt so shitty inside. And I think that was complicated. There's layers to that. I think it was coupled with the fact that I was completely transitioning from one life to another.
Mhm.
And I felt really terrible about that, about the repercussions of that. I felt horrible that that was going to hurt someone, despite however I might have been treated. I only ever want, to treat people with love and respect. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's hard to know when I'm hurting somebody. I think my coming out, there was a lot of shame associated with it. And I lived in that shadow of shame for far too long. And
Mm.
that really fucks someone up mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Like I
Yeah.
just felt like my spirit had been broken
Mm.
from the life that I had. And it was great because I was, coming into my own and I was, finally living a life that was authentic to me. But I just felt like I was kicked off a mountain and tumbled down and tumbled down and tumbled down. And I never understood maybe the reasons of why that happened. And it's still something I struggle with now, to be honest. But such is life.
Such is life.
Such is
Do
life.
you remember going back to some of like the really hard days, the darker days? Did you know or believe that it would get better?
Yes and no. I think I had a lot of hope that one day maybe things might change. And then I think I'm still waiting for some things to change. But what's gotten better is just, for me, I am pouring all of my like energy and healing right back into my own cup and myself and my relationship. And that's all you can focus on. I think learning, who is a safe person to talk to, getting yourself support professionally, really, really beneficial there. And ultimately, you can only be there for yourself. And I think that the people that are in your life who genuinely love you will support that.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think shame is like the ultimate disease of the human spirit. Like it's
Yes.
the fucking worst. It's like it will erode you. It's the most toxic feeling and experience ever. And the only antidote to shame is self-love and self-acceptance and self-compassion. And it's really hard to build those things where you feel like you're questioning like the core of who you are at the same time. And I can't even begin to imagine and fathom that experience. I know that you alluded to it, but I always think it's important to just straight up ask, as of today, are you happy?
Oh, I'm so happy.
Good.
I'm the happiest I've ever been. And that doesn't mean to say that things aren't shitty, but I am happier being my authentic self and having, no friends than I was living miserably in a life that wasn't true to myself. You know what I mean? There is so much happiness and joy that comes from stepping into the light and being authentic with who you are, despite people might leave. That's okay. It is better to be living a life that feels authentically happy. And yes, of course, like my relationship is amazing. We're very, very happy. But, even if things didn't work out with Madison, God forbid, like I would still be happier being a queer person because I am a queer person. And it is exhausting hiding that. That will kill you. That will kill you.
Silent shame.
Silent shame.
I know. It's like really, I think like it's so funny, no matter what you study or look at from a therapy perspective, like shame is really at the root of like quite literally almost everything that is detrimental to a person. And I think that there is a huge difference between harboring silent shame for yourself and outwardly expressing shame or having people express shame to you. And it's not that one is easier than the other, but they're both very different and they're both very toxic. One of them is easier to come to terms with because we can realize that people don't know shit and there's always a lot of opinions in the world and the only one that matters is your own. But in saying that, if you're only listening to your own and you're shaming yourself, that's not a hole that you're going to get yourself out of easily. And I hope that if anyone takes anything away from this, is if you don't have that person or that space or that cheerleader that's like in your informal circle, your friends, your family, anyone, like there are strangers, there are professionals, there are people out there that want you to feel like you can be authentically yourself and still be loved. And no matter how fucking hard that is to start the process, at the end of it is happiness, actual happiness.
Is so true. So true. I think about all of the things that I used in my straight era. Let's call it my straight era.
My straight era. How T-Swift of you.
You know that.
Hallie is the biggest Swiftie in the world, for anyone who didn't know that. I don't know anyone who's more dedicated. That might be a dangerous claim to make, but I believe it to be true.
You know what? It's my wifey to be. I think she takes the cake.
Really?
If there was ever, I don't know why, when you just make up weird scenarios in your head, if there was ever a scenario where we were presented with the opportunity to meet Taylor Swift, but only one of us, I'd say, take her. She deserves it. Honestly, and I'm not just saying that to be like, I'm so great. Genuinely, she is the biggest fan. out of anyone I know, including myself. And
I'm
I'm
bamboozled.
yeah.
I'm bamboozled. That's love right there. I also feel like for anyone who doesn't know, like, you'd be like, yeah, okay, but I feel like for what I know of you, that's like the ultimate sacrifice.
I and I say I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, without a doubt. I said that back before her and I were ever together. I remember saying that like years ago. If there was like, I just know that about her. Again, I
That's,
look back on things. I'm like, oh, maybe that was me. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, were we secretly in love this whole time? I think we were.
yeah, I
Anyway,
mean, listen, what is love?
I had a thought. I had a
We
thought,
went
and
back to straight era. Let's go to straight era.
my straight era, tricky time. I think there were so many, yeah, the things I used to care about then. Oh my gosh. I think I just thought I cared about them because I think that's what I was supposed to care about. Like, I remember even the wedding that I was planning,
Mhm.
I think I just was wanting things that I was supposed to want, or maybe like what my like parents would want or what his parents would want. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Versus now, like I said, like I would be so happy to marry her in a cardboard box. I don't care about any of that stuff.
Yes.
So
Yes. I think that there's actually a huge measurement and correlation to like, you know, that your happiness and your desires are authentic when they're not tied to things or expectations or like, I just think that there's a totally different feeling that comes from your deepest desire and love being intangible. And again, weddings are a really interesting spot to find out what that is looking like for you.
yeah. And I think with all of this, the biggest learning is am I living my life because of how it looks, or am I living my life because it genuinely brings me joy? And
Mm,
despite maybe her and I having, you know, disapproval or whatever, we live our life because it brings us happiness.
yeah.
And as hard as it is to maybe feel external pressure, because that is hard, at the end of the day, our happiness beats it. And that's
Yes.
what that is.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation and sharing, you know, your own experience. Again, I have always applauded you for just your vulnerability and bravery. And even going back to when Ali was talking about like just spending it like, hey, Instagram, I'm gay. Like I remember being someone on her Instagram, seeing that and being like, holy shit, like just the amount of like bravery to just put it out there like that. Like something that we've talked about is just how in this whole journey for you, it could have been so easy to just like become a hermit and like hide and not have to like show any of who you are to the greater world. But instead, you did like the total opposite approach, was just like, well, I'm ripping off the band-aid. Here I am, like take it or leave it. And I remember like, and at the time we didn't talk much, but I was like, holy, do I have respect for that? Like, because it's something that I think if everyone could even for just a split second experience what it's like to be unapologetically completely yourself, the just utter relief of that moment before the shitstorm falls out, shall I say, of people's opinions, just that moment, it's like pure bliss. And I am so grateful that you are happy, that you are where you are, and that you picked Kindred Roots, and that we are gonna, you know, watch you become everything that you deserve to become. And yeah, I hope that we, you know, can continue these conversations. And maybe in a future podcast, we can talk more nitty gritty about like little pockets of things. If people ever have questions that they specifically want talked about or addressed, I feel like that's something that we can always do. So yeah, hopefully more to come.
Thank you so much. I think part of the reason, not part, a large reason of why I love working for Kindred Roots is because I'm surrounded by support and love from yourself, from the rest of the team. You are such a wonderful light. Even I remember when I did come out, you left a comment that just was so empathetic and
Mm.
acknowledged how difficult that journey was. And I really needed that at that time. And, you know, I don't think you and I talked about that, but that was one of the things that that was like the little glimmer of like, keep going. It's going to
Mm.
be okay. Cause I was really, really struggling.
Mm. I feel like this is actually a great lesson for people out there because I remember when I wrote that comment, I think I was sitting with my husband at the time and I was like, do you think it's inconsiderate of me or weird knowing that I don't really know her to like say this? And he was like, what are you saying that's inconsiderate? You're basically like sharing love and just general human compassion. And
Mhm.
I genuinely remember sitting there thinking like, you know, you were ending a relationship with your high school sweetheart. You were going to be leaving a house, a dog. And I was like literally in the exact same situation, imagining what it would be like. And even if I didn't know you on a deep personal level, I just couldn't even fathom the process it would have taken to get to making that post or the bravery it would take to hit post on it. And
Mhm.
it's so funny to fast forward 3 years now and have this discussion and realize the impact that like you putting that post out had on someone like me who you wouldn't have even thought would see it,
Mhm.
and me writing a comment back to you not even thinking twice about the impact it would have on you, like just how the smallest things that we do and like simple basic human kindness can actually be the biggest difference between
Yeah,
someone having a really great experience and someone having the worst experience of their entire lives.
that's exactly it. I think our interactions with people, even if we think it's nothing, even if we think it's someone that, oh, I don't even know this person, it's so significant because anybody that gave me support at that time quite literally helped save my life.
Mm, mm,
Because I had so much negative experiences from people that I loved. And
mhm.
so that is so detrimental, that shame we talked about. So
Yeah.
any type of like positive feedback or encouragement was so significant in
Mm.
my own healing journey. Truly.
That is just like, it warms my heart. And I'm just so happy you're
And
here and I
oh,
love
I
you. And
know.
I just think life is so interesting and serendipitous. And yeah, for anyone who's ever contacting Kindred Roots, you will get Allie. And I hope that you love her as much as all of us do. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. You're the best.
Thank you. I'm so happy we had this chat. Thank you for providing this space. You're the best.
Oh,
You're the
you're
best.
the best.
You're the best, my boss lady. You're the best.
Okay. Thanks everyone for listening. And we will be back with another episode topic to be announced in about a month. Bye.